The Petronelli gym in Brockton was never just a building. It was a living organism, its brick walls scarred by decades of New England winters, exhaling the ghosts of 1,000 fights through every cracked pane of glass. The air inside carried layers of memory. The sour tang of sweat-soaked canvas that never quite dried, the sharp bite of liniment masking older blood, the faint metallic echo of knuckles splitting open on heavy bags that hung like condemned men waiting for judgment. On a biting November afternoon in 1967, the wind off the Atlantic rattled the loose windows like impatient fists, and a single radiator hissed steam that curled upward in lazy spirals, carrying the scent of rust and old ambition. A boy pushed through the door, 12 years old, coat threadbare from Newark's lean winters, cheeks hollow from meals skipped and dreams deferred, and the room's rhythm faltered for the first time that day. Marvin Hagler didn't announce himself with words. He let the door swing shut behind him with a clang that sounded like a starting bell in a fight no one else had agreed to. The older fighters paused mid-spar, sweat dripping from their brows onto the canvas in slow, deliberate drops, because something in the kid's eyes felt older than the gym itself, older than the city, older than the sport that had already begun to claim him. He stood there a long moment, absorbing the symphony the way a composer hears silence before the first note, the thump-thump-thump of heavy bags swinging in hypnotic rhythm, the squeak of sneakers on scarred canvas, the low murmur of Goody Petronelli correcting a jab. Elbow in, kid, elbow in, and the rhythmic pop-pop-pop of a speed bag rattling in a blur that sounded like machine gun fire. Marvin's gaze settled on a double-end bag snapping back and forth with vicious elasticity, and without asking permission, he stepped forward, wrapped his hands with tape that whispered secrets against his skin, and struck. The bag exploded into motion, a staccato heartbeat that silenced every conversation, every grunt, every breath. Petronelli stopped wrapping another fighter's hands mid-motion and simply watched, the way a blacksmith watches raw or decide whether it will become steel or shatter under the hammer. The boy's form was raw, unpolished, but the power behind each strike carried a promise that made the air itself feel heavier. From that day forward, the gym became his cathedral, his laboratory, his battlefield. Dawn found him running Brockton's frostbitten streets long before the milk trucks rumbled to life, breath clouding in white plumes that hung in the air like surrender flags he refused to raise. His sneakers slapped pavement in a cadence that matched the pulse in his temples, weaving through traffic at intersections, shadowboxing red lights, ducking imaginary hooks from passing Buicks and Chevys. He'd stop at the harbor's edge where the water smelled of salt and diesel, staring across the gray Atlantic as if daring it to throw a punch. Back inside the gym, he'd hit the double-end bag until his knuckles bled through the tape, then wrap them tighter and hit it again, the bag snapping back with a vengeance that mirrored his own. Losses in the amateurs came like winter storms, 55 fights, 36 wins, each defeat a fresh scar on a body already mapped with hardship, but he wore them like medals forged in fire. A Golden Gloves final in Springfield ended in a split decision robbery. He lay on a sagging motel bed, the mattress springs groaning under his slight frame, staring at water stains on the ceiling that looked like continents of regret. His fists clenched so hard the scabs reopened, blood seeping between his fingers like slow accusations. "They can take the round," he whispered to the dark, voice raw from screaming into pillows, "but they can't take the miles. They can't take the mornings. They can't take me." At 4 a.m. he was back in the gym, the bags paying compound interest on every slight, every doubt, every judge who looked away. When he turned professional in 1973, the debut felt almost incidental, a footnote in a story already writing itself in blood and sweat. Terry Ryan in a Fall River armory that smelled of stale beer, fried clams, and broken dreams. The crowd, mostly mill workers nursing hangovers, barely looked up from their programs as Hagler dismantled him in 2 rounds with the cold efficiency of a man balancing a checkbook. The promoter handed him a $40 check and a bus ticket home, the paper crisp and impersonal in his calloused palm. No headlines, no interviews, just the quiet click of the locker room door closing behind him like a coffin lid. Promoters stamped him high risk, low reward, too dangerous to build a card around, not famous enough to sell tickets, a fighter who could ruin a contender's record but not a gate. So he fought wherever 4 posts and a canvas could be found. Elks lodges where cigarette smoke curled like question marks around yellowed ceilings. High school gyms where the rings sagged under his weight and the bleachers creaked with the weight of indifferent parents. National Guard armories patched with silver duct tape and regret. The canvas stained with the ghosts of spilled beer and spilled blood. Opponents took the purse and prayed. He obliged with surgical brutality, racking up 26 wins, 20 by knockout, each one a private conversation between his fists and the universe's indifference. The chip on his shoulder grew into a boulder, then a mountain. Every "will call you" became a mantra chanted in the dark. Every snub a log on the fire that burned behind his eyes. He slept with gloves under his pillow, woke to the thud of his own heartbeat echoing in his ears like a war drum. He shadowboxed in the frozen food aisle of the ANP while housewives pushed carts around him, their stares bouncing off him like jabs off his chin. His reflection in storefront windows became his only worthy sparring partner. Left hook, slip, right uppercut, repeat until the glass fogged with his breath and the world outside blurred into irrelevance. By 1979, the frustration had calcified into something colder, harder, more dangerous than mere anger. In Las Vegas against Vito Antuofermo for the middleweight titles, he dominated for 15 rounds. Cleaner shots, better angles, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, but never clouding his vision, never slowing the relentless pressure that pushed the champion backward like a tide against a crumbling wall. The bell rang. The arena held its breath, certain the belt was his. The judges called it a draw. The crowd erupted in fury. Hagler stood motionless in the center of the ring, gloves dangling at his sides, staring at the scorecards as if memorizing a betrayal he would carry to his grave. He walked out without a word, the cut still bleeding onto his robe, the title still not his. In the locker room, he punched concrete until his knuckles split open like overripe fruit, whispering to the pain that they could take the fight, but never the work, never the mornings, never the miles, never the man he was becoming. Less than a year later, he crossed the Atlantic to London, where Alan Minter's trash talk had filled tabloids for weeks like cheap perfume. Hagler said nothing in return, letting silence be his sharpest weapon. Wembley Arena pulsed with British pride, Union Jacks waving like battle flags in a sea of beer-soaked voices. But 3 rounds was all it took. Relentless pressure that cornered Minter like a rat in a maze. Vicious hooks that landed with the sound of splitting wood, a corner towel thrown in surrender as the champion's legs turned to jelly. The referee raised his hand, and for the first time, the middleweight championship belts circled his waist, heavy and cold against his skin. The victory flight home was quiet. He carried the gold in a duffel bag like laundry, the plane's engines droning like a lullaby for the war he'd just won. Landing in Brockton, he was greeted by the Petronelli's tears and a steak dinner that tasted like vindication. He defended the titles 12 times over the next 7 years, each fight a statement etched in bruises and knockouts, his bald head, shaved clean to eliminate handholds, gleaming under arena lights like a warning beacon no opponent could ignore. He legally changed his name to Marvelous Marvin Hagler because announcers refused to say it, a judge's gavel in a Massachusetts courthouse granting what the sport withheld with casual cruelty. The Four Kings era arrived like a storm rolling in from the horizon. Leonard with his Olympic charm and million-dollar smile. Hearns with his Detroit right hand that carried knockout thunder. Duran with his Panamanian heart that refused to quit even when his body begged. And they fought one another without excuses, without politics. Legacy the only prize worth claiming in a sport that usually rewarded caution. Against Duran in 1983 at Caesar's Palace, 15 rounds became a chess match of survival played with fists instead of pieces. Hagler adapted on the fly, wore the smaller man down with pressure that felt like gravity itself. Conditioning honed in Brockton's freezing dawns paying dividends as Duran's legs slowed and his punches lost their snap. He emerged with a unanimous decision that proved he could win ugly as easily as beautiful, that his heart matched his skill punch for punch. Then came April 15th, 1985, at Caesar's Palace, a night forever etched in a boxing's soul as the war. A 23-city promotional tour had turned mutual respect into genuine dislike. Hagler wore a baseball cap emblazoned with the word war in bold red letters, and every syllable was a promise carved in stone. The opening bell unleashed 8 minutes of violence that transcended sport, transcended rivalry, transcended humanity. Hearns landed a right hand in the first round that would have hospitalized mortals, a detonation that snapped Hagler's head back and opened a cut above his eye that poured blood in crimson rivers down his cheek. The referee paused to check the gash, fingers probing the wound under the glaring lights. And for a heartbeat, Hagler's mind flashed to Antuofermo, to every robbery, to every slight. Not again. He answered with a third-round barrage that crumpled the hitman like paper in a furnace. Hooks and uppercuts landing with the sound of splitting timber, the canvas thudding under the fallen body as the referee waved it off. Promoters called it the greatest fight ever. Hagler called it Tuesday, wiping blood from his eye with the same calm he used to tie his shoes. 2 years later, the super fight against Sugar Ray Leonard arrived like a circus under the Vegas lights, a spectacle that dwarfed the violence with its glamour. Leonard, retired for 3 years after detached retina surgery, media darling to his core with a smile that sold cereal and cologne, danced back into the spotlight as if he'd never left. Hagler trained in silence, running hills at dawn until his lungs burned, shadowboxing beneath flickering street lamps while the city slept, his focus a blade honed to surgical sharpness by years of being overlooked. 12 rounds unfolded as contrasting philosophies made flesh. Leonard's hit-and-run flurries that dazzled the crowd and confused the judges. Hagler's stalking destruction that landed the harder shots, controlled the ring, pressed forward like an inevitable tide against a crumbling shore. When the final bell rang, most ringside expected the champion to retain. Hagler had been the aggressor, the destroyer, the man who brought the fight to his opponent. The split decision for Leonard detonated the arena in disbelief, a collective gasp that sucked the air from the building. Hagler stood frozen in the center of the ring, gloves at his sides, staring at the scoreboard as if it spoke a foreign tongue written in lies. He told a promoter offering rematch talk to tell Ray to get a life, then walked away from boxing forever. At 32, in his prime, heartbroken by politics rather than punches, the belt he defended with blood now slipping through his fingers like sand. He left America entirely, boarding a plane to Milan where the pace was slower, the sun warmer, the language a melody he would learn note by note. He settled into a life that felt like breathing after years underwater, learning Italian fluently until it rolled off his tongue with the same precision he once applied to combinations. Acting beckoned as a new ring. He starred in Italian action films, Indio, Virtual Weapon, laughing at his own stiff dialogue in dubbing studios, embracing the challenge of reinvention with the same hunger that once drove him to run Brockton streets at dawn. He mentored young fighters in local gyms where the bags hung lighter and the dreams came cheaper, attended major bouts as a living relic whose mere presence hushed crowds, signed autographs with the patience of a man who had finally escaped the spotlight's glare. Charity work filled his days. Youth programs in Milan's tougher neighborhoods, sports initiatives that gave kids the structure boxing had given him. His fame now a tool to lift others rather than prove himself. In quiet moments with his family, surrounded by plates of carbonara and bottles of Chianti, walking cobblestone streets under a sun that didn't demand anything of him, he found a peace the ring had never allowed, a stillness that felt like victory without the bruises. On the morning of March 13th, 2021, in a modest home in New Hampshire where he'd returned for family, Kay found him unresponsive on the couch, a cup of coffee cooling on the table beside him. A heart attack, sudden, ordinary, merciless, claimed the warrior who had survived everything the sport could throw at him, from Hearns' right hand to Leonard's politics to 15 rounds with Duran's unbreakable will. Joe Rogan broke down on his podcast, voice cracking as he spoke of a man who represented everything pure about boxing, everything honest, everything earned. Leonard, Hearns, and Duran posted tributes on social media, rivals transformed into brothers by grief, their words heavy with the weight of shared history. The boxing world stopped, not merely because a legend had died, but because Marvelous had finally found contentment, peace in a life rebuilt brick by brick after the ring took everything, and the Reaper stole it anyway in the quiet of a Saturday morning. From the ashes of Newark's riots to the neon of Vegas, from Brockton's frost to Milan's sun-drenched hills, Marvin Hagler had shown what it meant to never surrender. Even when the world refused to see, even when the final bell rang without warning. Welcome to Tales of the Famous, where the greatest fights leave scars no one sees. If this epic of blood, betrayal, and hard-won peace carve its way into your soul, smash that like Hagler's final hook, subscribe plus ring the bell for more warriors who paid in full and asked for nothing back, and share with every dreamer who knows glory is just pain with better lighting. Comment: the war, the Leonard robbery, or the quiet exile? Which moment defined Marvelous most? Next, the Titan who faced oblivion in the ring and never walked out the same. This is Tales of the Famous. Some legends are born in fire. Others are forged in silence.